Okay, should we start?
Yes, I'm good to go.
Okay.
If
Okay. So I'd like to start the session 3A, Social Protection and Safety Net on day 2. I'm Satoshi Shimizani at JICA Ogata Research Institute. I'm honored to serve as a chair of this session. So this session has 4 very excellent papers. The format of each paper presentation and discussion is same as yesterday. So each presenter has 15 minutes, followed by a 5 minutes discussion by assigned discussant. Then we'll have an open discussion, having questions and comments from floor, indeed virtual participants. So if you have your comments or questions, please write in the chat box. Just one thing. So I will slightly change the program. In the original program, we have 2 open discussions that cover 2 papers for each, but I'm afraid that it will be complicated. So I will open the discussion for each paper for 5 to 10 minutes separately. So just one open discussion for one paper. So the first paper is titled, so delay the pension age or the adjust the pension benefit, implications for labor supply and individual welfare in People's Republic of China. So this paper provides very interesting simulations of public pension reforms in China. The presenter is Dr. Yuan Deng, so Senior Research Associate, ARC, Center of Excellence in Population Aging Research at University of New South Wales Business School. So Yuan, so you have 15 minutes. Please start.
okay, thank you, Satoshi, for the nice introduction. So I will just go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right, 1 second. Okay. So. Okay. Oh, sorry. Is this good enough for the screen share? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. Oh, I don't know what happened here. Okay. So. Okay, thank you all for the panelists and organizers. I would like to thank the ADB Institute, JICA, and Japan Fund for Poverty Reduction for including our paper. Today, I'm going to present a paper titled Delay the Pension Age or Adjust the Pension Benefit Implications for Labor Supply and Individual Welfare in China, which is a joint paper with Hanmin Fang, Katja Hanward, and Shang Wu. So as we know that the populations in both developed and developing countries are aging. The population aging in China is especially rapid. So China has a multi-layer pension system that is comprised of different programs for different population groups. However, the average pension age is lower than 55 in China. So to address the rapid population aging in China, the Chinese government has announced plans to gradually increase the pension eligibility age for both men and women who are covered by the basic old age insurance, or we call it BOAI pension program. So I will give a bit more detail on the BOAI pension program in the next slide. So the plan is first proposed in June 2012. However, despite the significance of such planned reforms for millions of individuals, there is only limited formal analysis of the implications of increasing the pension age on the labor supply and individual welfare of the impacted Chinese population. So our analysis focuses on the basic old age insurance, or BOAI, in China, which covered over 4 million people at the end of 2019, among whom over 1 million were retirees. So the BOAI pension program has 2 components. 20% contributions from employers and 8% contributions from employees. So the pension eligibility age for the BOAI is 50 for blue-collar women, 55 for white-collar women, and 60 for men. Minimum 15 years of contributions are required for individuals to claim the monthly pension benefit. In China, individuals are not allowed to delay claiming pension benefits beyond the pension eligibility age, and early pension claim is rare in China. So the BOAI requires subsidies from the central and the local governments to avoid deficit since 2015. So in this paper, we developed and calibrated a life cycle model of labor supply and consumptions to quantify the implications of 3 alternative pension reforms on labor supply, individual welfare, and the government budget for the BOA pension programs in China. Specifically, we evaluated the following 3 reforms. First, increasing the pension eligibility age. Second, proportionally lowering pension benefits. And finally, simultaneously increasing the pension eligibility age and the pension benefits. I will come back to the 3 proposals towards the end of the presentation. So we focus on the Chinese urban males and analyze the heterogeneous effects for high-skilled and low-skilled workers. Our main data source for model calibration is China Health and Retirement longitudinal data. CHAOS is a national survey of a nationally representative sample of Chinese residents aged 45 and older. We also supplement CHAOS with data from the Chinese Longitudinal Healthy Longevity Survey. So we use the CLHLS to calculate the health transitions and mortality rates for very old age observations used in our model calibration. So CLHLS provides information for elderly Chinese aged 65 and older with a special focus on those aged 80 and older. So compared with the literature, our paper makes the following contributions. First, it contributes to the ongoing policy debate in China about pension reforms by quantifying the implications of different plausible reforms of the pension eligibility age and the pension benefit in a single framework. Our model also approximates the current pension formula of the BOA pension program more closely than previous studies. And in addition, we quantify how the labor supply, welfare effects, and pension budgets of the different reforms would differ by skill types. So we have developed a very complex life cycle model, and I will only briefly outline our model given the time constraints. So we model the decisions of 45-year-old Chinese urban males who have a maximum lifespan of 100 years. In each period T, individuals maximize the expected lifetime utility by making consumption and labor supply decisions. And we solve the model separately for high-skilled and low-skilled individuals. We assume that an individual skill type is permanent in our model. So there are 3 health status in our model: good health, bad health, and death. So in our model, low-skilled and high-skilled individuals differ in their preferences, health dynamics, labor income processes, and out-of-pocket medical expenses. We impose compulsory retirement age at age 65 to reduce the computational burden. Individuals with skill type S will obtain utility from leaving a bequest in the period of death. So an innovation feature of our paper is how we model and calibrate the pension benefit. So we approximate the statutory pension benefits P star using P, which is a linear function of the individual's career average wage bar and the number of working years before the pension eligibility age. This kind of regression-based approximation explains over 96% of the variations in the statutory pension benefits P star. So total income in our model is the sum of labor income and pension benefit. We impose a consumption floor in our model. So when individual cannot afford a consumption level which is greater than the consumption floor, then the individual receives government transfer. We do not allow for borrowing in our model, and we further assume that individuals invest their after-consumption wealth in a portfolio with a rate of return R. So equation 16 in this page specifies the problem for individual with skill type S in recursive form subject to the constraints and state evolutions we have seen in previous slides. The capital XT denotes the vectors of state variables and delta is our discount factor. So this optimization problem is solved numerically by backward induction. And we use the discrete continuous endogenous grid point method to smooth out the kinks in the value functions and the discontinuities in optimal consumption rules, which arise from a dynamic programming model, which with both discrete labor supply choice and continuous consumption choice. So we adapt a two-step strategy to calibrate our model. In the first step, we calibrate several parameters outside of the model. And in the second step, we calibrate the remaining parameters within the model. So we fit our model to the following moments. And in summary, we have selected the moments that capture the distribution of the key variables in our model. And the model is fitted to 70 data moments using 3 waves of Charles data. So this table lists the fixed parameters that are taken as given in the model, and we assume those fixed parameters are common to both skill types. So this table shows our calibrated parameters. So our model contains 14 free parameters, and we calibrate them separately for high-skilled and low-skilled individuals. So this slide reports how the model fits average labor force participation rates, average consumption levels, and the variance of average log labor income by skill type. So in our baseline model, all individuals in our model start to receive pension age at age 60, which is the current pension eligibility age. So as we could see from the slide, the model matches those key moments very well. So especially for the high skilled, it replicates the key features how participation rates vary with age and skill type. The model also performs well in matching the average consumption levels and the variance of average log labor income by skill type. So now I will show you how we use our model to evaluate the labor supply, government budget, and individual welfare implications of the following 3 hypothetical reforms to the Chinese pension system. So in the first counterfactual experiment, we raised the pension eligibility age from 60 to 65. So under this reform, most individuals face a substantial loss in lifetime pension benefits and will suffer welfare losses. However, both the lower pension payouts resulting from the delay in the pension eligibility age and the higher pension contributions will strengthen the pension program's finances. In the second counterfactual experiment, we keep the pension eligibility age at 60, but we reduce the annual pension benefits by a proportional factor such that the impact of Reform 2 on the pension program's budget is the same as Reform 1. And finally, in the third counterfactual experiment, we simultaneously raise the pension eligibility age to 65 and increase the annual pension benefits proportionally. So the proportional factor is such that individual welfare for both skill type is the same as that in the status quo. So such a reform by design is more likely to garner public support because individuals' welfare is unchanged from the status quo. And we are also interested in whether it can at the same time improve the budget of the pension program. So this slide shows a little bit detail on the effects of the 3 reforms on labor supply of the high skilled and low skilled. To summarize the results, so we can see that the high skilled will increase the number of working years between 45 and 75 under all 3 reforms, whereas the low skilled will only increase their number of working years under Reform 2. As a result, Reform 2, which proportionally decreases the pension benefit, has the largest positive effect on overall labor supply compared with the other 2 reforms. And here, we present the impact of the 3 reforms on the pension program's budget. So for a fair comparison, we compound the contributions from 45 to 55, using the implied interest rate, and discount the contributions from 61 to 65 using the discount factor delta. So we separately calculate the contributions and the payouts for the high-skilled and the low-skilled. So you will see there are different columns. So the column labeled net, it's simply the payout minus pension contributions from age 45 onward. As a result, a negative net value indicates that the total payout exceeds the contributions made from age 45 and onwards. So finally, the column labeled overall is the weighted average of the net values for the high-skilled and the low-skilled. So the first row in the table indicates pension program's budget in the baseline. And the second row in the table indicates that Reform 1 significantly improves the pension system's budget by increasing the pension contributions and reducing the pension payout for both skill types. Then the third row indicates Reform 2 achieves the same overall budget improvement for the pension program as Reform 1 relative to that of the baseline. And finally, the last row indicates that different from the first two reforms, Reform 3 achieves improvement in the pension system's budget by both increasing the contributions to and the payout from the pension system for both skill types. So to summarize our results, we can see that the Reform 1 raised the pension eligibility age to 65, could slightly increase the overall labor supply and cut the shortfall of the pension system by about 44% at the cost of significant individual welfare losses for both skill types. So Reform 2 proportionally reduced the pension benefit, while has the largest overall labor supply effect and significantly improves the pension system's budget, but at the cost of greatest welfare losses for both skill types. Finally, Reform 3 simultaneously raised the pension age and proportionally increased the annual pension benefit, while ensure that both skill types achieve the same expected lifetime welfare as in the baseline. It also cut the shortfall of the pension system by about 5.5%, and then will slightly decrease the overall labor supply. So in this paper, to conclude, we developed a heterogeneous agent life cycle model to evaluate the implications of the three pension reforms to the BOA pension program on the labor supply and individual welfare of Chinese urban males aged 45 and older. So our model successfully replicates the labor supply and consumption behavior of individuals with heterogeneous skill types. So the preferred pension reform will critically depend on policymakers' objective, as everything is still under discussion. So our study suggests that increase labor supply and improve the financial sustainability of the BOA pension program. Then if the government's objective is to increase labor supply and improve the financial sustainability of the BOA pension program, then they should consider reducing pension benefits. If the government's objective is to improve the budget of the pension program while ensure that both skill types are not made worse off, then a combined reform that simultaneously increases the pension eligibility age and proportionally rises the pension benefit may be an option to pursue. And thank you. That's all for my presentation today.
So very excellent presentation. Thank you, Yuan. So we have a discussant for this paper. So Professor Sang-Hyop Lee, Professor Department of Economics at University of Hawaii. So Sang-Hyop, please start your discussion.
Okay, thank you. Shimizutani Sensei, so this is my comment. I mean, the paper is straightforward. So the paper investigates the effect of alternative pension reform on labor supply, welfare, and government budget. And they consider different scenarios. The number one is increasing pension eligibility age, and the second one is decreased pension benefit. And the third one is interestingly increased pension eligible age and increasing pension benefits. So usually the simulation is actually 1, 2, or combination of 1 and 2. But this actually considers very different options. And he calibrated using 2 data sets, Charles, and also has longitudinal survey, longevity surveys, and focusing on urban males. And main results are intuitive. So in case of number 1 and 2, it improves the budget. Number 3, slightly improves in labor supply. actually number 1 and 2 improves, and number 3 options is slightly decreases. And for in terms of welfare, number 3 is the best, of course, because it increases the benefit for the pension beneficiary. And reduces differ by skill type and health status, etc. So this is an interesting and very important paper, and there are some innovations. It actually, first of all, it considered the 3, and it also shed some lights on policy implementation. And model is actually well designed. They consider like smoothing the kink point, and when they do solve the recursive model. So, and also it approximates the actual old age insurance rules, and although there are some assumptions. So that paper is good. But I have only 2 comments actually. My number 1 comment is why you consider option 3, because it's not common. It's very creative, but if you look at like Social Security around the world or OECD pension book for the last like 20 years, the usual reforms include like number 1 or number 2 options or combination of them, and many countries actually adopted that, and also increasing the number of years requirement. And the UK, France, Italy actually adopted that, and benefit adjustment, beginning longevity indexing, very famous, right? So for Sweden and Germany, and reducing the accrual rate for Japan, and the recalculating the cost of living adjustment, and designing the benefit for different income group. That's very famous for UK. And all other countries actually consider the unique options, but I actually don't see this option 3. Then there is a reason. The reason is the purpose of a pension is risk pooling, right? And actually, number 1 reason is improving the fiscal sustainability. Then, whether the option 3 is in PRC, I kind of doubt, because the number 1 reason is it may exacerbate the inequality, and it's not good for actually fiscal sustainability, because usually government actually implement pension reform, and the number 1 goal is to improve the fiscal sustainability. And as you know, China has a very high social security contribution rate. Actually, if you compare, Yuan mentioned that it's like 20%, and actually 8% insurance person, so 28% old age. But if you look at the sickness, maternity is 10%, work injury. So total actually contribution rate from employer and insured person is 43%. So there are only a few countries in the world who has a higher contribution rate than China. And it's also regressive, ceiling at 300%, but it's not that low, it's actually. But the revenue, if you look at the revenue, is much lower than the OECD and other countries. The reason is, it's not high rate or low ceilings, it's a compliance. So those who receive a pension actually receive a high benefit, and also employer contribute 20%. So when I actually served as a consultant for the Ministry of Finance China, that time actually, they said it's 70% of enterprises in the urban area fail to comply. I think it improved, so I changed the number, but I think still they argue that 50% of companies fail to comply the social security contribution basis. So that's the tax base. And the benefit side, it's actually, it has a high replacement rate. It's higher than, for example, Korea. If you actually have a full Korea urban employees who are fully compliant, and also pension eligibility age is low and population age is rapid. So it is inequality, high replacement rate, low PA, and rapid population aging problem from the benefit side. In other words, if you increase the benefit and delay the pension eligible age, it exacerbates inequality, because the main issue is compliance issues, right? So because of those who benefit from the pension, this system is not everybody. But the suggested option 3 is actually delay retirement, but compensate for them, right? So that's the, I don't think actually the government actually will like this option, because, and another reason is there is no free lunch. So in the model, it only consider the older generations and try to compensate the older generation's welfare. But when we actually do this kind of simulation from intergenerational point of view, somebody has to pay. So if there are some papers which consider other generations, which only consider number of option 1 and option 2, then and then of course there is some target, right? So option 2 is cutting the benefit. Option 1 is increasing retirement age post-buy by about 1 year per decade. So this is a paper actually, another paper. Then it didn't consider actually the cost of like working more. But in that case, option 1 is better than option 2 if elderly is willing to work more. So that means actually somebody has to sacrifice. You cannot just compensate for the older people and leaving the other generation behind. So that's actually my just major comment. And there are some minor comments, but I just stop here. One minor comment is actually crowding out effect, but that's really minor. Okay, I stop here.
So thank you, Signups. So very, very excellent discussion. So Yuan, so do you have any quick response to the Signups discussion, especially on the option 3?
Yes. First, I would like to thank you, Sang-Yun, for the detailed discussion and thank you for liking our paper. Also, I agree. I understand your concern that probably you haven't seen this kind of Reform 3 probably in the other papers, but also, I think every country is different. I think most of the literature focused on the delay in pension age or adjustment in pension bandits is focused on the US and Europe. Actually, this kind of analysis, especially from structural model or life cycle model analysis or this kind of simulations, is very rare in China. And so also, so probably we have to say we are one of the first to really do a proper life cycle model to simulate this kind of results from a policy, especially from the policy perspective. Also, we have seen in Europe that some countries, they may consider increase the age, reduce the benefit, at the same time increase the taxes. Right, so I think it's all tailored to its culture. So the reason why we are interested in policy 3 because both policy 1 and policy 2 will decrease individual welfare substantially for both skill types. So I think, and to be honest, there are some blogs from China written in Chinese because when the government consider policy, they probably want to garner public support. So if they just go to the street and ask someone, if we delay your retirement by 5 years, were you happy or not? Most of people, especially those blue-collared people, they are actually strongly against it because their health by age of 60 is already deteriorated at a fast rate. And you now asking them to work five more years without giving them any compensation. So they are the voices from the individuals, from the people from China. So the third policy, why we are interested in it is because we want to make sure both skill types have the same welfare level at the baseline result. At the same time, we are interested whether it can also achieve financial sustainabilities. So we think the third policy might gather more public support because individuals make sure they are better off, at least they're not worse off from the baseline results. And at the same time, it can slightly improve the government budget. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, comments. So, Signups, so do you have any quick additional comments on?
No, the time is already up.
Okay. So, thank you, your cooperation. So I have, I have just one question from floor. So from Kim Lim. So in your model, do low skill and high skill workers have the same objective function facing the same BC? Maybe I'm not like the optimization concept in this model. From your opinion, do the poor household intended to optimize their utility? So this is a question for Yuan.
Yes, both skill types intend to optimize their lifetime utility under their own budget constraint, because a lot of variables, they are skill specific. For example, they have different health status, different medical expenses, and a different income. So in that sense, their budget constraints are also different. They're skill type specific. As a result, the utility function is also skill specific. So each skill type trying to maximize their own utility based on their conditions or state variable evolutions. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And maybe I think I have one more question from Aiko. Do you have?
Well, can we ask questions? Sorry, we can ask questions. Can I ask questions?
George, please. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. So I'd like to ask about the model, if I can. So you're starting basically at the age of 45. That's sort of quite restrictive, given that sort of you're missing contributions from about, the quite substantial part of the population. So why 45? Then you mentioned sort of the binary labor supply choice. What does that mean? Is it 0 and full time? And then sort of there's this questions about the retirement age. You mentioned sort of exogenous and whether it's set, when actually people get the pension payment. And whether you observe from the data that actually people work beyond that age. And I think that sort of you show already that they do work beyond that age. And then sort of I would be interesting about the income process. So how do you sort of estimate that? And how that looks compared to countries such as US, Australia, and other developed countries? I mean, is the variance of earnings much higher, for example, in a country like China? Or is the uncertainty less pronounced? I don't know.
Okay, first, I would like to thank George for raising probably 4 to 5 questions. George actually is one of my colleagues at SIPA, and we see each other quite a lot before the COVID. So George, I don't know how much time I have to answer all your questions. I think you have many questions. If I didn't miss all of them. So first, the question is how we account for the contributions before age 45. We actually did account for the contributions before 45. We did the out-of-sample simulation to get individuals' full wage history and employment status before 45. So all the contributions before 45 is properly taken into account in our model. And why 45 is because the main data set for our analysis is Charles, and Charles only collected data starting from 45. So you could think of sort of a data restrictions. What's the other questions, George?
The labor supplies. So is it just 0
right.
40 hours, or is it sort of some other points?
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of details in our paper. If you're interested, I can send you the link because the paper is also available as an NBER working paper. Because of the time constraint, I actually ignored or didn't talk all the details. So the labor supply indeed is a binary. So full-time or not working at all in our model, right? And what else questions, George?
So is that what you see in Charles data, that sort of people would be working just full-time or 0 hours? So do they have more flexibility?
That's a good question. So in Charles, we have very limited information in terms of number of hours they are working. So that's why we decided to go with 0 and full-time.
Okay. So yeah, I think that I like to continue the discussion, but this section is very busy. So I like to close this the first paper presentation discussion. Thank you for the Yuan and Sanyopri. Then I like to move to the second paper. That's the second paper. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. And the second paper is titled "Improving State Capacity to Target Extreme Poverty: An Evaluation of a Randomized Intervention in Bangladesh." So this paper shows a very interesting results on the impact of the capacity building intervention related to old age allowance. So the presenter is Professor Atom Rabani at the University of Dhaka. So you have 15 minutes. Please start.
Thank you. First of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to present this ongoing work. So I would really like to, looking forward to comments and suggestions. I'd like to apologize in advance because the internet connection problem that I'm facing at home, but hopefully I'll get through. So this is a joint work with quite a few number of collaborators, and I would like to mention Viola Sri, who is here. So if there's any difficult question, I'll deflect those to her. So our main motivation for this project is actually quite a few, and some of them have already been mentioned as part of this whole conference. I won't get into those. But one particular angle is the performance, the government or governance performance vary a lot, both between governments and both within governments. And there is a very large ongoing literature that looking into it in the context of tax collection or finishing of projects in the context of Nigeria. So this is fit into that literature, and we want to contribute to that. And if you want to explain the variation in governance performance, there are two broad classes of explanation. So one is agency problem. So we can think about the republic as a principle, and the government bureaucrats or local elected representatives who work on behalf of the republic are the agents who are supposed to deliver government programs or reflect the social preference. And then realize the agency problem. So for example, bribing, corruption, special interest, favoritism. But there's another angle which is much less explored, is the capacity constraint. So even if there's a perfect alliance between agents and principals' social preference, the agents may still lack the capacity in terms of training, information, financial resources, and even time. So we wanted to explore these issues in the context of old age allowance beneficiaries, particularly the selection. Bangladesh does not have a universal social pension scheme, and the local selectors select the old age allowance beneficiaries. And so we wanted to understand the extent of like how big this problem of lack of capacity is. And we also wanted to test whether investing in the local capacity can improve the selection or not. So the context in this particular case, as I've mentioned, Bangladesh has already rolled out a very large social safety net program to support the elderly population. Currently, we have about 5.7 million beneficiaries. This is the largest program of its kind for the government of Bangladesh. This is implemented by a separate government office called Department of Social Service, which is under the Ministry of Social Welfare. But it has its own bureaucracy, which runs parallel with the Civil Service Administration. And the selectors include local government representatives, the community members, both directly and indirectly, and also social service officers. The selection criteria currently, so there are two layers. So one is the necessary, include the necessary criteria. It requires the beneficiary will be a citizen of Bangladesh. To prove that, they will need a national identity card or birth certificate. They also need these documents to prove their age. We have 62 years for female and 65 years for men. The annual per capita income needs to be for, so as it intended, it needs to be for the beneficiary or intended beneficiary. That needs to be below 10,000 taka per year. But the way it is used is they take the selectors look at the average for the household. So you can already see there's a discrepancy between the way it was written and the way it is actually practiced. And they also, the potential beneficiaries cannot receive any other allowance from the government. On top of that, there's an intention to prioritize certain applicants. So for example, the older applicants should receive priority. If they're unable to work or they have any disability, they should receive priority. And also in the rural areas, particularly if they're landless or own land below 0.5 acre or 50 decimal, those criteria can be used to prioritize the selection. So in the first part, in 2018 and 19, we did extensive formative research in the northwestern part of Bangladesh. Traditionally, these are the poorer parts in Bangladesh. Even the poverty situation has improved in this area over last 20 to 30 years. We randomly selected 4 upazilas or sub-districts. So in Bangladesh, we have a 4-tier system, starts with union at the lowest level, then sub-district or upazila, then district, and then division, and then the central government authority. So we did extensive formative research to understand the extent of mistargeting. And we have problem with both leakage, so people who are not like false positive. So even if we look at just the age and income criteria, about 80 and 70% of the beneficiaries receive this benefit, old age allowance, but they did not meet the criteria, and they were undercoverage. Undercoverage actually natural because it was not an universal program, and there were not enough benefits to give to all eligible beneficiaries from those areas. But as you can see, the social welfare can improve if we can lower the leakage and if we can divert some of those distributed benefits to the people who are supposed to receive them. So you can already see that there is a kind of a principal agency problem lurking there that we wanted to address. But it is not only point estimate. If we look at, for example, the whole distribution, you can see that in terms of wealth index, based on the usual measure that people use, and also the eligibility index. So this is based on the eligibility criteria that I have shown you before. So if we do eligibility index in terms of how many of those eligibility criteria fulfilled by the people who are receiving the benefits, you can see the people who received and people who didn't receive the benefits, there is actually not much of a difference, right? So I think so in ideal case, we would expect that people who receive the benefit should fulfill higher number of eligibility criteria, but that's not the case in our data. And why that's the case? So we'll see kind of 3 things are happening. So for example, number 1, when we collected data, when we surveyed the local selectors, member of the selection committee, they generally think that the selection is very good, even if their knowledge about the eligibility rules are actually quite low. It is much better for the age criteria, but when it comes to income and land threshold, most of the selectors or member of that selection committee, they don't even know what criteria intended by the government guideline. As a result, and it's not only that they don't know the rules properly, even if they know the rules, so we give them hypothetical scenario like a vignette studies. We find that in the rightmost picture, in the right picture, you can see that when they're scoring the eligibility criteria, there's a wide dispersion among those selectors, how those rules need to be used. So, for example, there's almost uniformly distributed how a particular beneficiary or applicant should be assessed. So there's a wider disagreement. So I don't think it's very uncommon to find that a lot of people are mislabeled or misselected within this program. And And when we look at the actual beneficiary and those who did not, we can see that there are certain predictors which work well. For example, older applicants are more likely, or older citizens are more likely to receive the benefit. But also we find that people who are more able in terms of physically able, they are also more likely to receive the benefits. Not only that, people who have higher level of connection with the representative and more likely to receive the Ward Shobha meeting, that's the political meeting that take place at the local level, they're also more likely to receive these benefits. And ideally, we should not see the relationship between those two. So I'll just go over very quickly over this slide. There is a concern of corruption, but corruption is not systematically associated with receiving of the benefit. But we should be careful because there's maybe an attenuation bias. Based on these findings, we developed the intervention. So one part was training the local government representative and the selection committee members about the different rules and how to use those rules. And we also collected the information from the potential beneficiaries and handed over those information to those same selection committee members. And we carried out this intervention in 80 unions in 80 upazilas. So 40 of those upazilas were chosen for the intervention, and 40 were selected as control areas. So I'll go directly, and we can talk about, since I don't have much time, I'll just talk about directly about some outcomes. So in terms of knowledge, we found that knowledge has significantly improved. So it's about, if we compare with the benchmarks, about 10% knowledge improvement that we could find, that we estimated in the treatment areas. And it's mostly coming from the income dimension or income criteria. People already know a lot about, for example, age criteria. We did not find a marginal impact in that way. Unfortunately, that knowledge, the impact that we found on the knowledge did not translate into the actual beneficiary selection or the quality of the beneficiary selection. I should also mention that the way it was designed, we have 2 doses. So everyone had the knowledge. All the selectors in the area had the knowledge or took part, participated in our knowledge intervention, but we did not collect the information about the eligibility criteria for everybody. So we had a 2-layer. One had both the information and how to use those knowledge, and some selectors had only some areas the knowledge was, or the knowledge training was present, but not the information. So, but we did not find any dose impact. Interestingly, if we look by component, we find that in terms of income and land, the point estimate was negative in the, so one the interpretation is in the intervention area, the poorer households were selected for the old age allowance benefits, and it is more pronounced for the land because land is also easier to observe and there's more public knowledge about the land ownership, but it's much more difficult to assess the income of the beneficiaries. And we also find that there is a dose response. So if the selectors have both the training and also information about the beneficiaries, we find a stronger results. We find a stronger results as intended by the program. So as conclusion, social safety net delivery, mistargeting is a persistent problem. I think it's much more common. It's common to many different contexts. So I believe this knowledge can be translated to other areas, and we are also planning to follow up with some more intervention. It is a result, this mistargeting is a result of many different factors, so unwillingness and also the lack of capacity. We address the latter aspect with a with moderate effects, which brings into the idea that or brings us to that there are complementary factors that we should be looking at. For example, in our case, we found that there was a significant number of beneficiaries had to pay bribe or some fees to receive the benefit based on a list experiment. So I think if we really want to improve the selection in this similar context, there should be more comprehensive intervention addressing many different aspects to have meaningful impact on selection in the context of old age allowance, but maybe extendable to other programs as well. Thank you, and thanks for listening, and over to you, the chair.
Thank you, Aton. Very interesting presentation. And we have a discussant, Professor Jayash Poder at the Boa State University. So you have 5 minutes. Please start, Jayash.
Thank you, Satoshi, and thank you, Aturno, for your interesting presentation. Good to see you again today, and thank you, organizers, for including me as a discussant. I really enjoyed reading this paper. I, in fact, read this paper twice, once more than a week back, and then also earlier today. So this paper essentially, I think, does a very nice job of articulating what's the existing gap in the literature, and I think that came across very nicely as I was reading the paper. So I just want to highlight that the paper is explicitly trying to examine what factors might exist that may induce mistargeting of a national social pension program for the elderly population in the context of Bangladesh. And moreover, it's also, looking into whether an intervention that relaxes capacity constraints, is that going to improve the targeting of social transfers? And what's special about the paper, in my opinion, is that to answer the question, not only Aturno and co-authors evaluate an intervention that actually provides training as well as data on the target group, but also it takes a step forward and actually just for potential spillover effects, which is what I'm always interested in when I am thinking about examining these things. So, the spillover effects on the widow allowance scheme, which actually uses similar poverty-focused, targeting rules and procedures of selection. So that was very nicely done, and I think the paper does a really nice job of identifying the gap. I have 2 specific comments and concerns, or if maybe that wasn't articulated well enough, and I think that's partly because it's maybe the authors do not think it's super important. But one, and I know this outcome variable of using poverty probability of poverty index, which has also been implemented by the IPA and other folks, is pretty common. I know it's a general poverty measure, and I think the paper also briefly mentions why the outcome variable of PPI is appropriate and the potential advantages associated with it. I was curious, there was in fact, and I can put this on the chat for Aturno too, there was a blog post made by the World Bank a couple of years back that kind of looked into potential limitations associated with PPI. So I was curious if the co-authors or if Aturno has thought about using something else, maybe some kind of consumption-based metric, that may be preferable to using PPI, or if that metric is not available, at least talking about potential limitations of PPI might be useful for transparency reasons. But again, I leave that to Atunu and his co-authors, and maybe there's a good reason why that's not necessary, but that's something kind of struck in my head. And then I think something Atunu kind of briefly mentioned at the end, which is specifically looking into the mechanism. So I think the paper, so after reading the paper, a natural question that emerged was, so is it true that capacity constraints exist because of potential corruption? And so this led me to think, how big of a problem is corruption in the context of Bangladesh, and how can the results be transferable in other settings, in other countries in South Asia, and can we kind of think about external validity to some extent? And I saw that in the paper there were papers by Karthik Muralidharan and Paul Noas that were cited, and I think there's some interesting insights on corruption that have come out in recent literature. So I was mostly curious about how should we be interpreting the estimates, which have been briefly explained in the paper, but it'll be kind of nice to see that more fleshed out. So those were my two concerns for Atunu, but I think it's a very important paper and it's written very well, and I enjoyed and reading the paper twice. So kudos to the co-authors, and that's all what I have got for my concerns for Atunu. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jayash. And Atun, so do you have very quick response to raise the 2 points? And just we have just one question from floor.
Sure.
I'm curious to know this. So do you know? So please give your very quick responses to
Sure.
them.
So I'll directly go to the two specific comments. I think the PPI question and its validity, I think it's quite, it's important. We were looking for, I think there is a trade-off between what kind of data that you can collect. For example, the consumption-based poverty measures are definitely much better, but it takes more time to collect. So PPI, and I think there's a whole class of indexes that people use. PPI is one of the one we chose because people have used it before in our context, and it has been validated with using the data that we have recently. But we will definitely look into what other outcome, for example, this land and income and other criteria-specific outcomes that we have from our data set. Mechanism is, I think, I really appreciate that you have raised it, because this is something that we are really interested in. And I think one main takeaway, at least for me so far, is that knowledge is an important mechanism, but that may not be sufficient. And there are other mechanisms that are in place, for example, reduction of corruption, but I don't think our intervention is really addressing that. And there may be other issues that one need to address. So there may be a lot of complementary features of the organization that needs to be addressed to have this meaningful, significant impact in this context of lowering or moving toward better targeting and government performance. So we are very interested to kind of explore that.
Pardon me? Oh. So it seems that the connection is not good. But it seems that we are slightly lagging the time schedule. So I'd like to close the second paper. And I just one question from AG, but it seems that we need to hurry to the questions, the next paper. So thank you for Aton and Jayash for presenting the paper and the discussion. So I now move to the third paper on the effectiveness of insurance mechanism for the elderly in China. So this paper takes a nuanced approach to consumption insurance and welfare impact, focusing on health shocks in China. And the presenter is Yasu Sawada at the University of Tokyo. So Yasu, please start. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Satoshi. So the title of my presentation is Effectiveness of Insurance Mechanism for the Elderly in China. This is joint work by Jin-Yi Fang. She's a PhD student at the University of Southern California, and she spent actually virtually spent time with the Asian Development Bank last year as a summer internship. But she was the very first batch of virtual interns. Okay. So little background. As we have seen first paper clearly, China has been aging at one of the fastest pace around the globe. And but on the other hand, long-term care and pension systems and formal support for the elderly is still developing. As a result of making informal care and informal insurance, self-insurance, as well as private transfers critical. So original question we started is, what's the extent of this suboptimality of existing informal or non-market-based insurance mechanisms? And also a little bit focused academic question is, can the conventional test strategy of consumption smoothing across time and also across space or across individuals really tell us about the efficiency of broader insurance mechanisms? So these are background. And then what we do, first we're gonna investigate overall, we're gonna investigate effectiveness of insurance mechanisms against a variety of health shocks on well-being of the elderly in China. Health shocks, we are gonna use death of spouse, hospitalization risk, physical health deterioration, and cognitive capacity deterioration. And then first we perform conventional consumption smoothing tests across time again and across space against the health shocks. Then we will deep dig self-insurance mechanism against the health shock. So first 3 breadpoints are kind of standard. And then we also directly examine welfare impacts of consumption and self-insurance using a self-reported well-being measure and also clinically validated depression scale. And then towards the end, we're going to check suboptimality of insurance mechanisms using framework by Raj Shetty and Looney. So we believe out of first 5 breadpoints, what we do, last 2 are kind of novel. And related literature, there are a bunch of related literature addressing LTC and informal care givers and receivers, how public transfers may crowd out private transfers, and motivation behind private transfers, and focusing on China, role of one-child policy for private transfers, and then canonical studies using consumption risk sharing and also life cycle permanent income hypothesis. Data, we're going to use the Charles data, the same as the first paper. And we use particularly 4 waves of data from 2011, 2013, 2015, 2018, covering 126 cities. We're going to use the demographics information, economic information, income, consumption, saving, borrowing, and the health-related information, physical health, as well as cognitive situation. Then, in order to grasp welfare, directly we're going to use the subjective well-being and depression scale. So Charles data we're going to use. And the Charles data is really a derivative of harmonized HRS family data, share family data, which was illustrated by Professor Axel Bruchspan yesterday. So 2 popular models I started about the consumption smoothing. First one is a life cycle permanent income hypothesis, basically empirically implementing consumption Euler equation and the log linearized version or exact linear version based on CRRA utility function. In any case, bottom equation, consumption growth, regressed on S. S is a shock variable, as well as other control variable and fixed effect. So to explore how shocks variable affects the consumption. If a transitory income, shocks variable is basically a proxy of transitory income. If LCPH is really valid framework, then transitory income do not affect the consumption profile. But transitory income can be basically kept by saving. So this one, the first one is across time, consumption smoothly across time. Another canonical model is full consumption risk sharing, hypothesis testing, or consumption insurance model. Cross-sectionally, if people help each other, then idiosyncratic income shock should be diversified away within insurance network, informal or formal insurance network together, broader insurance network. Then bottom equation, again, consumption growth, individual consumption growth should be orthogonal to individual shock variable. So again, shock doesn't affect the consumption. So this model, if we can support from data, I think basically we can say some type of consumption behavior optimality is satisfied. So we can make some statement about welfare consequences. So this is a variable, shock variable, again, death of spouse, hospitalization, and physical mobility, memory deterioration. These are the shock variable we use. Outcome variable, food consumption, as well as the non-food consumption, including non-food items. And then consumption other, we include medical, education, and other broader consumption. Then insurance channel, we look into savings and borrowings. Another outcome, we use a life satisfaction measure, a 5 Likert scale measure, and also CASD, a 20-item scale, a CSD depression scale, we use as an outcome variable. Okay, so this is the simple consumption growth regressed on shock variable, health shock variable. The first one is the food, second non-food, third other, and finally inpatient costs. First 3 columns, we see death of spouse affects the consumption profile negatively. However, first column, food consumption, basically 5% insignificance threshold, we see no shocks affecting food consumption. And the non-food also, only death of spouse affects the negatively. That means we treat, this is, interpret, this is a member size effect captured by death of spouse variable. Consumption other affecting inpatient and mobility lower, few variables affecting other consumption items. But naturally, if you get hospitalized, then your expenditure, including a medical expenditure, will increase. So I think third one and fourth one, inpatient expenses, I think we see some reasonable result. But first column and second column together, particularly first column, we may conclude across time or across space, consumption smoothing hypothesis seems to hold overall. So some type of formal, informal, self-insurance or mutual insurance, some type of informal arrangement support the consumption smoothing and help achieve optimal consumption reallocation. So what's the behind? So consumption is equals to income minus savings. So by using this identity, budget constraint, we can explore consumption smoothing should be financed by either saving, dissaving, or transfer. So with this framework alone, another type of regression. So coping behavior or coping mechanism, left-hand side, each of different coping regressed on shocks to see which variable really function well to achieve this consumption smoothing. Here, today we show this saving and also borrowing as a self-insurance mechanism against the health shocks. Satoshi, how many minutes do I have? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. So what's the result? The saving, actually death of spouse and inpatient and also upper mobility problem, deterioration, seems to stimulate this saving. Actually, left-hand side is saving, so negative means this saving. So people utilize this saving to support the consumption, encountering these health shocks. And right chart showing impatient when happens, people seems to borrow money. So again, borrowing seems to be another important channel. Then kind of novel approach, we directly measure welfare consequences of consumption smoothing and also risk coping. We follow Chetty and Looney, celebrated article in JPAB to do and empirically implement. What we have done, so we regress welfare, direct welfare measure, self-reported satisfaction, but we treat this as reverted indicator dissatisfaction, and also CESD, left-hand side variable, regressed on consumption and this saving and debt. The result shows a reasonable consumption. If you have a higher food and non-food consumption, of course, your welfare goes up, and dissatisfaction goes down, and the CSD depression goes down. So bottom forest chart shows clearly consumption enhance your welfare. But at the same time, in order to achieve this consumption level, you have to dissave. Dissaving is stressful for you. Or you have to borrow money to finance consumption. That's going to be this stressful. Actually, forest chart shows the actually next one. Bottom forest chart, bottom two variable, especially saving or dissaving seems to be affects the your welfare. So saving, then your welfare goes down, and also dissaving, your stress level goes up. So basically, Chetty-Rooney framework seems to be empirically supported. And risk coping parts we have. And then we started doing heterogeneous analysis. Rural household and urban household separately. So this is a forest chart for risk coping. Above two is a saving, and bottom two borrowing. So above, encountering death of spouse and impatient, the hospitalization, rural household especially relied on this saving. So this one is saving, so negative means this saving. And the bottom showing that impatient who have done financing this hospitalization by borrowing, actually rural household. So rural household seems to use this saving and borrowing as important risk coping. Then we also check the stress level. Doing so probably stressful. So left above is consumption outcome, and the bottom is this utility part of our welfare function. And indeed, food consumption and non-food consumption increased, particularly rural household left top chart. And then this saving seems to be stressful, and also borrowing seems to be stressful for particularly rural household. Then, so I have two slides to wrap up. So then, so we found, consumption, of course, your welfare goes up, but at the same time, in order to finance consumption, you have to adapt kind of this utility, this saving and borrowing, and the data really support. So what's the actual, coping behavior of doing this consumption smoothing? How that deviated from optimal arrangement under the availability of social insurance. So again, we can adapt the Chetty and Rooney framework, and Chetty-Rooney framework second breakpoint showing that marginal welfare gain from $1 insurance is actually product of gamma, relative risk aversion parameter, and consumption growth. This is a very important, or this one, a second breakpoint can be also equivalently interpreted as a marginal welfare cost of income shock. And the second breakpoint is very important because even if we observe consumption smoothing and the orthogonality of consumption growth against the health shock, if relative risk aversion parameter is large, then that's not necessarily welfare, how to say, indicating a good welfare level. Actually, potential, providing insurance can enhance welfare. So with the data, Chinese charts data, we need to quantify what's the welfare cost of encountering an income shock. Although we observe a consumption smoothing, we adopted slightly general utility framework, decreasing rate risk aversion utility framework, so that we can allow rich versus poor RRA coefficient are the same. And then we estimated welfare function and this utility parameter to compute overall welfare losses arising from lack of insurance against the income shock. So this is the extended version of Chetty-Rooney. So this is a result. Left chart showing debt, having a debt and using a debt to smooth consumption was a welfare loss. And black line, black CDF shows the black PDF shows the urban household, and blue shows the rural household. And rate risk aversion parameter, we don't estimate. We just set the some 3 different ranges parameter. And first paper sets rate risk aversion parameter equals to 2, which is closely affected related to the case of alpha equals to 2. And the right chart showing this saving, adopting this saving, what's the welfare cost? Adopting this saving to smooth consumption, what's the welfare cost? Again, blue is rural and the second urban. We can notice 2 findings. First one is urban, actually rural welfare costs statistically dominating in the first order statistical dominance. Urban households. So lack of insurance seems to be more salient among the rural household. Secondly, actually, horizontal axis and vertical axis is a little different, left and right. We see this saving has a much bigger significance if we compare borrowing. So this saving seems to be a main way for current Chinese elderly to handle health shocks, but that seems to be really stressful. And that also, but in terms of magnitude, this saving seems to be larger. So question is how to replace this saving with a more formal insurance mechanism. So wrapping up, we found consumption smoothing across time and across the individual, but we also found complete mechanisms utilized by these families or elderly. This saving particularly and also borrowing seems to be closely associated with mental stress outcome. And indeed, we found significant deviation from optimal arrangement. So with this strengthening, so official or formal social safety net can welfare enhancing and in especially targeting manner, targeting a particular rural household. And even when we observe consumption is not very sensitive to health shocks, we found substantial welfare consequences. With that, I'd like to stop. Thank you very much, Satoshi.
Yeah, thank you, Yasu, for the fascinating presentation. And we have a discussant, Dr. Zhenlian Wang, a senior research scientist at Duke University. So you have 5 minutes to discuss, so please start. So you are muting, Zhenlian.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this paper uses China Health Retirement Longitudinal Study and to analyze the effectiveness of insurance mechanisms for the Chinese elderly, such as older adults' daily life by uncovering negative shocks in their life. This is a very good study, and it has addressed a common problem to which most Chinese older adults are facing. Indeed, it is important for Chinese government to reform Chinese older adults social insurance program in order to improve Chinese older adults' daily life quality. Yeah, my first comment or suggestions is, it seems to me that the paper analyze the negative shocks effects to the family members. The data might be analyzed most from the death of spouse or the illness of the spouse. I'm wondering if there are deaths of illness of lonely older adults they are without spouse, and that affects to their children in your sample. If yes, I want to suggest that you may also analyze it. Secondly, you analyze the difference between deaths or inpatient illness of older man or older woman. In China, women's socioeconomic status are much lower than mine. I guess that death of old man's effects may have more effects than the death of older woman. Thirdly, this down analyze the unique data sets of the Chinese longitudinal health longevity survey, which were conducted in 23 out of 31 provinces, covering about 85% of the total population of China. Professor Yi Zeng and his colleagues found out that controlling for various covariance, the multivariate statistical analysis clearly demonstrates that all the parents living with children has a better outcome in terms of capacity of daily living and cognitive function. I'm wondering if you could find out if there are significant differences between living with children and not regarding the degree of older adult and covering negative shock. Finally, I do agree with author that special attention should be paid to rural and low-income people, since they are more vulnerable with a higher risk of uncovering negative shocks in their life. Thank you.
Thanks, Zendian. So Yasu, so do you have very quick response to Zendian's discussions or comments?
Yes, Jenny, thank you very much for very good constructive comments. I agree. First, the role of children should be further investigated. Indeed, we also analyzing private transfers from the viewpoint of one-child policy that can give us a nice IV. So we are now refining our analysis, not only saving borrowing, but also private transfers from children we are working on, and also co-residence or separated living role of children. I think we can further investigate. And also, I agree, gender heterogeneity can be addressed, and I think we can not only focusing on vulnerable segment, rural and low income, as you mentioned, but also we have to really allow richer heterogeneity so that we can help refine, help identify government's targeted policy. Yes, thank you very much. Over to you, Satoshi.
So thank you. So thank you very much, Yasu and Zendian, for your very nice presentation discussion. So, but unfortunately, we have less than 30 minutes for this section, so I will skip the open discussion. So for participants, if you have any questions or comments, please write the comments and the questions in the chat box. And then I'd like to move to the last paper. So the last paper is the title, The Inequality of Access to Social Welfare Program for Older People in Indonesia. So this paper uses a very detailed data to examine the disparity in access to social programs by groups in rural Indonesia. So the presenter is Dr. Mu Will Abza, the lecturer at the School of Social Work, Universitas Islam Yogyakarta. So Mu, you have 50 minutes, so please start.
Thank you very much, Satoshi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, thank you very much for coming to these sessions. Today, I'm going to discuss our paper on quality of access to social welfare program for older people in rural Indonesia. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge and thank to the Ministry of Religious Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia and the Australia Research Council, Center of Excellence in Population Aging Research. This paper is formed part of my PhD supported by those two institutions. I will start my presentation with a case of a poor elderly woman at the age of 64 years old who take care of her two aunties at the age of 87 and 90 years old. She stated that my income is not enough to take care of my two aunties. I'm suffering, crying in my heart. I worried if one of my aunties dies, who should I talk to? There is nobody that I can ask for help. There is nobody to talk to. So this case is a description of the difficulties of many elderly people in rural Indonesia. In this situation, who should help? Children and family? Not always, as many of them are poor. Many of them migrate and working. Community? Maybe yes, maybe no, as to some extent the community support might not be sustainable. Market? It is often inaccessible as it is often market is very expensive. The government, it is a must because the government is the last layer of support when the previous support is not working very well. So there are three objectives of this presentation, including the first one is to analyze how and in what way government has supported older persons. And the second is to examine the extent of access of older people to the components of the government programs. And the last one is to examine the challenges of implementing the programs and opportunities to improve the service quality. Why this topic is important? The first is the demographic transition characterized by low fertility and mortality rate and increasing life expectancy has influenced a gradual shift in the age structure toward higher age groups. So this figure demonstrates the steady increase of the total fertility rate and an increase in life expectancy from 1960 to 2018. The demographic transition has dramatically increased Indonesian percentage of older from 4.5% or 5.3 million in 1971 to 9.6% or 26 million in 2020. Compared to the other Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia has the highest absolute number of older persons in Southeast Asian countries, followed by Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines between the 1970s and 2030. The second is that the majority of older persons live in rural areas, commonly areas where the young people migration is high. So the young people migration challenge the traditional family aged care system. The third is the welfare reform under Jokowi administration aims at providing universal social security to all Indonesian citizens. The implementation of the National Social Protection Law provides an opportunity to improve services to the elderly. The fourth is that the proportion of older people needing services is relatively high. So for instance, the figure 5 here reveals that 27.3% of older people needing long-term care. So this is some of the studies in Indonesia investigating various aspects of aging, such as the impact of migration on vulnerability of older persons, women experience on aging, living and care arrangement. However, we yet lack of people to the various government programs and how existing program can be improved. The data is drawn from 2016 Aging in Rural Indonesia survey combining quantitative and qualitative approach. For this paper, we will focus only on 6 pockets of population aging located in North Sumatra, West Java, Yogyakarta, East Java, and Bali provinces. To examine the extent of access of older people to the component of the government program, we employ social exclusion theory. So access to social rights is operationalized by enrollment or participation in social services, particularly food security, pension, health insurance, and posyandu lansia. So this flow chart shows the exclusion from services might be associated with 3 groups of predictors, including socio-demographic characteristics, need or health status, and enabling capacities. So the first part of the analysis is elaborating the way government supported elderly persons. Much progress has been made in terms of national policy commitment to provide comprehensive services to older persons that can be clustered into 5 clusters. The first cluster is the social assistance. Social assistance is non-contributory procedures targeted at poor older people, such as social pension, home care, daycare, nursing home, and food assistance. One of the social pension programs is ASLO. Don't read in English, as ASLO here might have different meaning in English. ASLO is a provision of cash transfer of around 200. The second approach is social insurance. That employs a contributory mechanism implemented through National Health Insurance and Pension Program. So the third cluster is the provision of health services. One of the services is Post-Lansia program, which is defined as a county-based program aimed to improve the health status of older persons through a health check, cardiac rotation, specific exercise for older persons, distribution of healthy food and vitamins. So the fourth is empowerment or income generating activities such as vocational training and start business support. And the last approach is awareness raising. So the second part of analysis is examining the extent of access of people to the component of the government program. Logistic regression analysis was performed to study factors determining the degree of social exclusion in assessing social welfare program. So in accessing government services, depending on sex, region, land ownership, receiving remittance from children, and social class. So the first is gender pattern of social welfare program. So the table shows the sex of the elderly is definitely a significant predictors of enrolling in the pension system and post-lansia participation. Older people, older women here are significantly more likely to participate in post-lansia activities, while older men are significantly more likely to have access to pension. So the field observation strengthen this finding as can be seen in these 2 pictures. So the first picture here describes the gender pattern of post-lansia program in which elderly women participate more than elderly men. So the gender pattern of post-lansia program is partly might be caused by the state influence. So the state influence is manifested through the way it organizes and provides services to the older persons. So the first is that almost all government staff responsible for older people's health, midwife, and health cadres, as can be seen in the second picture here, are women. So these factors might influence the gendered nature of social welfare program where female elderly dominated the services. And the second is the eligibility of social assistance program requiring a carer from family members. Conditional cash transfer for elderly, we call it as PKH program, for instance, requires a carer as one of the requirements for obtaining the services. So it is often the carer of the elderly is female family members such as wife, daughter, or daughter-in-law. So this system might perpetuate the role of woman as care provider for family, particularly older parents. The second main finding is inequality by social class. So the higher education attainment, the higher the likelihood of older people to access social services, including pension, health insurance, and post-lansia. In addition to education attainment, the older people who have farmland are more likely to have access to health insurance, pension, and food security programs. Food security program here is specifically provided for poor people. But the people who have land, which is a measure of social class, that more likely to have those kind of programs. So the older people who have remittance from children have significant higher odds of having health insurance, and the likelihood of older people who are coming from higher social class to access services indicates the unequal distribution of resources, which is the main measure of inequality. So what drives or contributes to these inequalities? One of the main causes of the inequalities is that the social security system is often contributory, with limited access to non-contributory programs. Should this mean that over 73 million people will potentially face poverty after their retirement? And the current young people might have low coverage of pension in the future, as shown by the transition to adulthood survey in Greater Jakarta, where only 17.3% of young people has pension. Moreover, the non-contributory schemes such as social pension is very small in scope. So the Ministry of Social Affairs, as the leading sector for social welfare program for the elderly, has allocated only around 100,000 older persons out of 2.8 million older people who need assistance. So these figures describe the relatively small coverage of social services for older persons. For instance, older people who have pension is only around 7%, and social pension is around 0.5% in the research areas. And this coverage is similar with the coverage at the national level. The small coverage is caused by the underfunded of social protection program in Indonesia. So the program for elderly and disability is targeted only 0.001% of GDP, and among the spending of social protection, the budget for elderly is only 1.7%, which was much lower than spending for research on social protection at 2.3% in 2014. Moreover, the total investment of Indonesia social protection system was only around 0.73% of GDP in 2017, which was much lower than Nepal at 2%. The second reason is that the political ideology in developing policy is focusing on investment. Decision makers often see funding of children's services as investment for the future. A government officer, for instance, states that the government only focuses on the well-being of children without considering the aging population. Similarly, health office staff who have responsible for managing programs for older persons maintain that developing programs for older people is a choice and not a priority in health service center. Another challenge is poor targeting. We would like to take a case of social pension or PKH Lansia is an example of poor targeting here. So if we see from the data from Jesusunas 2020, 8.1% of older people receiving PKH is from middle household expenditure, and 1.5% from the highest expenditure. And it is only 18.4% beneficiaries are from poor families. Another challenge is unequal access of social assistance by region. So older people in Java, where the capital city is located, have the higher access of direct social services to older persons, such as conditional cash transfer and ASLOT. The statement from the Ministry of Social Affairs and BKKBN might reflect the orientations of the development program, which is concentrated on Java Island. An informant from the Ministry of Social Affairs, for instance, stated that it is a problem in our ministry where the coverage of social services is everywhere, but the largest portion is in Java Island, because the population in Java is the largest compared to the other provinces outside Java. An informant from the Ministry of BKKBN said that the program are focused in Java and Bali Islands, while other regions such as the East Indonesian region get less attention. Another example is Puskesmas Santun Lansia and Pos Lansia programs. So we can see from this figure 6 and figure 7, that both programs are clearly concentrated in the 6 provinces on the islands of Java. So what drives these inequalities? The first one is because of the population in Indonesia and the aging population itself are concentrated in Java Island. And the second one is the concern of the provincial and the central government is that they do not have the authority to deliver direct services. As after decentralization, the district government gained the authority to deliver direct services to the people, while at the same time, most of the programs are initiated by the central government. Another challenge is lack of older people participation in designing and implementing the programs. And the next challenges is lack of program integration among government institutions, as has been noted in some of the literature, is that those programs that I mentioned before that implemented by different government institutions, sometimes they don't have intensive coordination in implementing those services. And the last one is poorly prepared health worker, because sometimes in the rural areas, many people, young people migrated to the cities, live behind the elderly parents. So the midwife, as the frontliner, we call it in Indonesia as garda terdepan of health worker, have to deal or have to provide services to older people. Sometimes they don't have enough knowledge about the health for the elderly. So this is some of the challenges. So to conclude, so the Indonesian government aims to provide social rights for other people comprehensively that can be grouped into 5 clusters. The first one is social assistance, social insurance, the provision of health services, empowerment, and awareness raising. And the second one is some of the challenges that affect the quality of services for elderly include very limited coverage, poor targeting, inequality access, and lack of program integration and coordination. So this is some of the ideas that we propose to improve the services for the person. The first one is there is a need to increase the public spending at least 2% of the GDP as proposed by the many experts of social protection in order to provide appropriate and quality services for the persons. And the second one is developing and mostly responsibilities of companies, for instance. It is very huge potential from corporate social responsibility to be involved to participate in providing services to older persons. And the third is advocating the local government to replicate the model of the social services developed by the central government, because it is common that all of the services is initiated by the central government. And the next is integrating fragmented services, because as we know that many government institutions run the services separately. So it is important to provide integrated fragmented social services through the case management and community-based approach. And the last one is improving the competencies and skills of the health workers. So this is the limitation of the study, because the data is gathered between the late 2015 and early 2017. It might not capture the recent policy, as the government policy in Indonesia sometimes is changing very fast. That's all. Thank you very much. I over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dung, for your excellent presentation. So we have a discussion. So CV Irshad, a PhD student at the Indian University, Indian Institute of Technology. So Irshad, so you have 5 minutes. So please start the discussion. So we have just less than 10 minutes. So please keep the time. Irshad.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I
Do
think
we
now
start?
it is audible. Yeah, yeah, sir. Is it audible now? Hello. Hello.
Yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Satoshi, thank you, Satoshi and Apsu, for presenting your paper. So the paper was on inequality of access to social welfare programs for older people in Indonesia. And the study is very relevant because there is limited research available on social security coverage in Indonesia, particularly in rural context. So this particular study has conducted to understand three major issues. First one, it looked at the extent of access to social security coverage for older people in rural Indonesia. And it also looked at the exclusion aspect of the social security coverage. And finally, it also looked at some of the possible ways through which the existing social security coverage can be improved. So broadly speaking, this study has used both quantitative and qualitative study data, which I really appreciate. And the qualitative data, which is actually used to substantiate in places where the quantitative information was not providing any substantial interpretation. So the study has assessed the social security coverage in forms of health insurance coverage, pension, financial and trusting, which are kind of cash transfers as well as in-kind assistance from government and also from community. And they have also used a lot of predictor variables to explore the extent of social security coverage and also to look at the inequality dimensions. It broadly covers all a set of socio-demographic characteristics, health-related variables, and also some of the factors that categorized as enabling or coping capabilities. So overall, the study found that there is a lower levels of social security coverage in Indonesian context, in Indonesian villages, which is, I think, which is very common in low-and-middling countries, particularly in countries where population is becoming aged now, low-and-middle-income countries particularly. And there are many reasons which have discussed in this particular paper, which include lower public spending, and the existence of more informality, because very a small share of the population, they are engaged in informal sector. And also there is a concern of inadequate preparedness among young adults. I mean, the saving culture and the pension culture, which is not very common in low and middle income countries, and also the quality concern in the healthcare services. So from the inequality aspect, the difference in social security coverage, the study found three major concerns. One is the gender difference, that is men, they are more likely to be enrolled with the pension scheme, while female, they are more likely to, women are more likely to be part of community-driven programs. So it's kind of gender-specific difference in different social security options. And the second one, which is a social class difference, here they have the paper has looked at the educational difference and how the social security coverage is different based on educational difference. So they have found there is a problem of poor targeting, which I think in Indian context also, there is a study by Vela Asri, the second speaker. She also has a paper on this poor social security coverage in India. So I think this is a general problem in non-middling countries, which some of the reasons which the presenter already mentioned. It includes administrative problems like the decentralization issues, the integration of different sectors and so on. And the last aspect of inequality, which the paper highlights, is the regional difference, because some regions, they have kind of advantage in terms of capacity to implement various programs. So there is a concern of equal access to social security coverage across different regions. So some of the key message of the study, I think these are all very common to most low and middle income countries. And this particular study, they highlighted all these recommendations to improve social security coverage, particularly using that qualitative part of the data. So it includes, they're suggesting to expand the public spending, mobilize resources. It may be through collaborating with developmental organizations, private companies, NGOs, and the administrative problems, the improvement of proper decentralization. And also there is a concern of the integration of different programs. I think this is also very common because we have different programs for older adults, but we have different departments, different managers, but the integration and coordination is also very important. And the last thing, which is the health professional, training them, it's also very important issue because the geriatric professions, geriatricians, which is also an evolving idea in non-middle income countries. So I think they have highlighted some of the general recommendations through their paper. And I just want to recommend just one point that maybe, because these are all using kind of qualitative statements, but if possible, I really recommend Professor Absor to extend the study to kind of using large coverage, because you have used only 6 regional areas. Maybe you can extend and can use kind of large quantitative information on this decentralization and implementation. Even, for example, the healthcare utilization kind of data you can generate, if possible. Maybe you can think of that in future. With that, I conclude. Thank you.
So thank you, CV, for a very good discussion. And since we are running out of time, so I'd like to close this session. And thank you, Mu and CV, for your presentation and discussion. And overall, this section covered a wide variety of papers on the pension reform and consumption insurance in China, and capacity building intervention in Bangladesh, and access to social program in Indonesia. All of them are fascinating and very relevant to policymaking. So thank you again for all presenters and the discussants for very interesting papers and consulting comments, as well as for our participants. So the next section will start immediately. So Oshio-san will make a keynote speech. So thank you again for all. Thank you very much.